Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first in-person meeting we've had for our club since last April. It's been about, please be quiet. Thank you. Thank you. Got a good crowd here this evening, maybe about 30 people or so, something like that. And I know there's about a dozen or more joining us virtually via Zoom. So welcome to everyone. Wanted to, I guess we start with our normal stuff, you know, what we would do, which would be the treasurer's report. And George. Yes. George is actually going to do a real in-person physical.
Well, first of all, welcome to all you new members and returning members. We have John Thompson, Jim Schlarb, Tim Gimmett, and Tom Brown. And I have Tom Brown's card and receipt. Okay, I gotta get back to it.
Welcome.
And we have a new member tonight, Dan Madsen, and we have a visitor, Eric Sackett. Okay. We have 83 members that have paid their dues before, and this just adds to it. We're back up to about 90. So we're only a net drop of about 10 members from last year. So that's, you know, we're held.
That's very really good. Very impressive.
Yeah. So as long as I'm up here, I'll do a treasurer's report since that's part of my deal too. Our current balance is 8279.91 less the stuff that got put in. Oh wait, forgot one more new member. Ron McCovey. Ron is a new member.
Oh, welcome.
Yeah, he just last week. Okay, so checkbook balance is 8279. We had a demo for the Belcher demo for last June.
Yes.
For June, and then some expenses for licenses and incorporation status that we had to pay. That was $35 and the demo was $300. So we're looking good. We're looking good.
Great.
Let's spend some more money.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
All right.
And since we are doing in-person meetings, this is going to be like our normal, what we've always done in the past. So we're going to have a show and tell. There's also a raffle. The raffle can only be for people who are in person here. Unfortunately, there's no way we can technically or legally do a raffle for the Zoom participants. It just, sorry folks, but it just doesn't work that way. So I will be doing a raffle later on. We've got a number of blanks there donated by members. And so $1 a ticket as usual, or 6 for $5. And I will be back there a little bit later. We'll do the raffle a little bit later in the program. Before we start the program, though, before we start our demonstration this evening, we're going to do a show and tell like we've done. And you can go get your wonderful items and bring them forward here. Okay, let's just get out of the way here. You gotta, oh, okay.
He said workbench.
All right.
Okay. So when I make little boxes and doodads, people always say that's nice, but what is it? Or what do you do with it? So I've been looking for things that are a little more functional. So I found this plot plan that has lots of finials, which I love to turn. And this top here, you were supposed to curve plywood and bend it to an arc, but I just made a full circle like a segmented bowl and got 3 of them out of it. So I got 2 more to make now. And the back, I found a nice figure piece of walnut and resawed it, made my own plywood and laminated it with contact cement. So I book matched the center there with some nice figure. And yeah, the movements are cheap, like $15 or something like that. So any questions?
Was the movement from Clock
Small,
Kid?
of course. No, I got it from some other.
Okay, just curious. They're big and they're local in
Yeah.
Wisconsin.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Kurt. Harold, you've got a few pieces here?
What?
Oh, did you want to bring up your pieces?
Okay. I got lucky a couple of weeks ago and a good friend from church decided he had some fiddleback maple that he'd had for about 30 years. And he decided he was neither a carpenter or a cabinet maker and he wasn't going to make anything with it. So I ended up with 5 8-foot 1x12s and one a little over 14 1/4. It's got pretty nice figure to it. Nice stuff. And kind of new experience. I had never turned the plate out of 3/4 inch stock. It's interesting. I did use the vacuum chuck. I didn't even try to mechanically chuck it. Did the vacuum chuck on the back so I could control the dish with only 3/4 inch. There's only a 1/2 inch disc in the face. And to get it, uniform and consistent, it's nice to have everything out in the open and bringing it along. And then turn it around, chucked on the other side, put my base on and follow the profile. That's finished with velvet oil. That's what I use all the time. Just another piece of the maple, but a smaller piece. And it's got some nice figure to it. And the big contest is to guess what this is. Some know. It's the material. Ever see anything like that? I'll pass it around and take a look at it. It's, should we say, a different form of particle board, because that is sunflower seed hulls. Okay.
Thank you, Harold.
What would that mean?
So you need all the sunflowers and make your own
Oh,
balls.
yeah.
How many coats of velvet, right?
Any more show and tell? I see a couple of bowls there yet.
Those are empty bowls.
Oh, very good. Thank you. Okay. Let's move on. I wanted to make a note though. We had some people respond to the admin to our website mentioning that they did not get the initial invite from Jerry. He sent it out on Friday. And if you did not get that invite initially, because Tony sent another one this morning, I believe it was. If you did not get that invite, please email Tony. So we'll know if that is a problem or not, or maybe it's something on your end. We can figure that out. We want to make sure everyone, whether they attend here or stay at home and do it virtually, we want to make sure everyone gets the Zoom invites from the club. So this evening, we have one of our fellow members, Tony. Oh, I'm sorry, Dave, yes.
I just want to mention that during the break today, I'll be handing out pen kits for anybody who wants to make pens for troops. I've got the kits, I've got about 160 left. And there's also a lot of wood pen blanks that you can help yourself to. Thank you.
Very good. I don't know if the folks at home heard that, but Dave Drickmeyer announced Turn for Troop. There's still pen blanks and there's a lot of wood blanks here. And sort of going on that theme of community projects that we do. We also have beads of courage bowls that people make and our empty bowls too. So please remember to make those. And because we do send them. Let's see, beads of courage. Yes.
What's the deadline for all this stuff?
I was just about to say. So beads of courage can be anytime. There's no specific time when we need those. I just go to the hospital.
Paul brought in a couple empty bowls, why don't you
Yes.
throw them as well? Okay.
Yeah. I go to the hospital, I meet with Kim Meyer, who is our contact person for empty bowls, and she's a nurse at Children's Hospital here in Milwaukee. And so I just, when I get about 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or however many we have, I just set up an appointment and I drop them off. And as far as empty bowls, their main fundraising event is in early October, mid-October. So we'd like to get any empty bowls here by, at the very latest, the September meeting. Unless you can make some arrangements to drop them off during the month, but because I can, and then what I do is I drop them off with our contact person. That's Colleen Bowler, Cream City Clay. She handles what we do on this end. And let's see, Turn for Troops, Dave, when are all the pens due for that? When are the pens due for Turn for Troops?
The November meeting,
Okay, November meeting,
and
so,
on Veterans Day in November, we have a turn for troop upstairs on a Saturday and Sunday that you can also come in and turn pens then.
okay, all right. So, did that answer the question? Good, good. Getting back to our demonstrator, Tony's gonna demonstrate. He has a fancy new gadget that does really cool threads on little vessels. They're really, really neat, and also makes spears with the same with the same fixture. So I will hand it off to Tony Rozendaal, and he will show us his magic. Thanks.
Thanks, Ron. So I think I'm over prepared. So I'll just start with kind of a story of how this came about. If you remember, a year ago, March, we had a normal meeting. April, we didn't have a meeting. I don't remember what happened in May.
We had
An online meeting?
with
Oh, with
California.
That's right. And then in June, we had our first meeting screened from down here, and I was doing acorn boxes. And I was fitting the lid for a pop fit onto the acorn box. About that same time, I listed a few acorn boxes on Etsy and they took off. So I've been making acorn boxes pretty steadily for the last year and 2 or 3 months. And it didn't take long. I got a little bit of feedback that the lids weren't real stable. And I knew that, you know, it was hard to get a consistent fit on the pop lids. And so I thought, well, it'd be really nice if I could thread those lids. And actually, in about that same time frame, I bought this threading tool, which I loaned to a fellow member last summer and just now saw it again tonight. That's okay. It's good. So I played with the threading tool a little bit, and one thing I came up with was something like this. And guys, if I need to be somewhere else, tell me. So what this is PVC pipe that I've chased the threads on with the threading tool and made a threaded lid. And that, yeah, okay, that sounds good. But when you look at how the depth I had here for an internal thread, I didn't have that kind of a depth to follow through with the chasing tool on an acorn lid. And then, you know, if you look at this closer, you'll see that maybe these aren't the best threads, and you have to be really careful with this box or it'll cross thread when you put it together. So what to do? Well, you know, you don't always have more money than sense, but that never stops you from putting something else on the credit card. So I decided maybe I'd get a threading jig. And I looked around at what was available, and I decided to go with this one. And this is Chef Ware Kits threading jig. And when you look on their website, they want to talk to you about the fact that not only is it a threading jig, but it can be converted very handily to a spear jig as well. And so that's what it looks like. Now, how does this thing work? I'm going to try to give you just a little bit of a dry presentation here before we actually do some threading. I have the chuck up here to help get the camera in focus before the meeting started, or just to make sure the camera was going to work. So what we have is we have a little 60-degree cutter that goes in the headstock of the lathe. This is actually two pieces. This is a cutter plus the collet that holds it in. So this is 60 degrees. I don't know. I've never counted the cutters on there. There must be about 10 of them, it looks like. And that goes in the headstock of the lathe. And it's held in with a dowel, like so. I won't tighten it up right now. And then that is spun. They recommend 2,500 RPM. And then the workpiece stays in the chuck. Always try to be careful about keeping this thing protected. So the workpiece stays in the chuck. And we'll actually be working with this workpiece in a few minutes. But then it threads on the jig. The jig is brought up to the cutter, and then you turn the workpiece into the cutter. The cutter is spinning, but it's stationary. So this is your lead screw right here. And this lead screw happens to be this lead screw happens to be 16 threads per inch. And you can get other lead screws. I got one other lead screw when I got the jig, and that's 10 threads per inch. I've never actually made anything with the 10 TPI threads or lead screw. So the lead screw is held into the jig with these two collars, and there's a wave washer between them. And the wave washer is to take slop out of the lead screw. So when I take it apart to swap it over, if we don't run out of time, you'll see how that all comes apart. And what I will do is I will pass this around and you can take a look at it. So there's the chuck adapter just slides on this end, and there's a set screw to hold it on. The knob slides on this end, and there's a set screw to hold it on. So that's a lead screw assembly. So that's the threading jig. Our priority this evening is to do threading. If we have enough time, we'll swap it over into the spear jig, and we'll talk about how we do spears. And you can see I have a few things prepared there to talk about that. So, any questions about the jig? Obviously, as we make some threads, it's kind of going to explain itself a little more.
Who's the manufacturer again, Tony?
Chef Ware Kits.
Chef Ware.
Yeah. Chef Ware, ChefWarekits.com. He's been around a while and he sells quite a bit of other stuff. I bought some pepper mill mechanisms from him. He sells some kits, and this jig is kind of his shtick. So makes a big deal about it all being made in the USA. I do have the air compressor running because we do use air for a number of things while we're doing this. So we talked about making acorns last year, and a lot of the process is the same. One thing I did bring along, this has nothing to do with threading, but for some of you guys, this may be.
Tony, I think you can dip down a little bit to get the microphone. We lost it.
Sorry about that. Okay, what are we gonna do here? We'll move this up a little bit. That's part of the reason for having the smock, of course, is to keep the curlies from going down your shirt front. Okay, so we talked about the acorns last year. And this has nothing to do with threading, but it may be a little bit of interest, and that is one of the things I was having trouble with on making acorns is I was just hollowing them out with my spindle gouge, and I was having trouble going too deep. Well, this is something I saw for making thimbles a number of years ago. Somebody said, well, just take a spade bit and modify it to cut out the inside of the thimble. So that's a modified spade bit. So now when I go to hollow out, to rough out one of these acorn blanks, I just put this in my tailstock, bring it in, and I bring it in exactly how much I want to do. And then another tip that may be helpful to you is I happen to know what the thread inch is on my tailstock screw. So if I want 1.25 inches depth on this, all I know is that once I start to cut, I turn 12.5 rounds of my tail screw and I have 1.25 inches deep hole. So I'll go in and I'll do like 20 of these bottoms in a morning, and it just helps, you know, zap them out. And then that 20 will last me for a couple months while I go through and then this one you can see after I got the depth and hollowed it out, I did come in here a little bit and ease it out a little bit. So I always let these guys sit. If it's ash around my house, it's usually green. So you can see why we have to come in and do a little bit of truing here. Let me know, is this all right if I wear this? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to true this blank up a little bit. Again, if you watched the demo last year, sorry about the noise, but all this, I do most of the turning with this spindle gouge. And this is a Thompson 1/2 inch standard spindle gouge that I've got it's actually the grind that Thompson recommends, but you'll see that it's swept back quite a ways. If you do that, you will there's a bit of a learning curve with it. It likes to run back like a skew, but if you learn how to approach the wood, you'll be okay. Okay. So we're trued up and we're going to prepare the surface that we're going to thread. This would actually, in a normal work, for me, this is probably where I go ahead and sand out the inside of the acorn bottom. I'm going to skip that step. So it's going to look like I'm doing this without measuring, but I'm actually measuring the thread area. The length of the thread area on this is going to be 2.5 parting tools. Okay, I've done enough of them. You know, you can do that too. Like if another trick that I've learned, if I'm making birdhouses, which I haven't made for quite a few years now, but if your skew is at 3/4 inch wide, and you want the peg on your birdhouse to be 3/4 inch long, it's a skew width. I mean, you know, you don't always have to measure everything every time. So what I want to do is I want to prepare a threading area that is in line, that's parallel to the ways on the leg. This particular blank doesn't have much of an angle. So what I'm doing is I'm sighting down that threading area, I'm sighting down against the line of the blade. And then I'm making an undercut. And that undercut is where the cutter is going to run out past the end of that threaded area when I'm cutting my thread. That'll make more sense in a little bit. In the interest of time and because of the type of wood I'm using here, I'm not going to put CA on this area right here, right now. And we may regret that. In fact, the more I look at it, I'm going to change my mind mid-course. So we're going to condition this area that we want to thread with a little bit of CA. Oh no, come on.
Tony, can you move your light from the view?
Sure. Is that better? Well, we may have a situation here. Looks like we're all right, so. The more porous your wood is, the more you want to do this, and ash itself isn't too porous except for the growth ring. I don't know what you call those. It has those little spaces between growth rings. And on this threading, whenever I use CA, I always use accelerator. And the reason for that is even if you think you're gonna, be a little patient and walk away from the piece and come back and just let it set normally, the CA not only quicken, or the accelerator not only quickens the set, it also makes it less gummy. And you don't want the CA to be gummy when you're cutting threads, unless you like just flicking stuff off of your cutter with your thumbnail for minutes at a time. I had it happen this morning, as a matter of fact, even though I use the accelerator. So I use accelerator religiously, if you will. Otherwise, you're going to end up with gummy stuff on your cutter. So because I use CA, I'm going to spin this one more time. I'm going to use my box scraper. We're just going to touch that. Because I always forget to do it, I'm going to do it now. We'll touch this piece as well. We're just leveling the CA and making sure that we don't have any lumps or bumps. And since I have this running here, we'll give that just a little bit of a bevel. I do touch the wood while it's spinning quite a bit to tell me where I'm at. Saves a lot of time turning the lathe off and putting it back and turning it back on. So I try to remember all the critical things. Sometimes they're just a habit, but I took the tool rest out, and the first thing you do is you knock the shavings off the top of the banjo. And the reason for that is when I brought this in tonight, I had to set it up for this lathe. And this is right on the center. This is centered with the center of the headstock. In fact, I was going to talk about that when I talked about it a little bit earlier. But we'll show you how we do that real quickly. As I brought along a dead center, I put it in here. If you look at this, there's a pivot or a machine center in the middle of the lead screw. And you just make sure that that's all nice and neat and snug. And then you set this to the particular lathe that you're working on. So at home, I have a robust, and the robust actually had to move this collar down like 1/8 of an inch for it to be centered on this lathe. I didn't have the dead center in there very tight, obviously, or I would have had to use the knockout bar to get it out. So Steve, do you see my nifty little centering piece here? The day that I loaned the unmentioned member my thread chasing tool, he made a suggestion that maybe I'd want to center this drawbar in the back end of the tailstock, and it does. That was a good idea. So there, that's the cutter. It's in, drawbar's tight. It will spin. Mount this on. Okay, so on my robust, the banjo hole, probably a better word for that, sits in the middle of the banjo, but on this thing it doesn't. So you'll see some videos out there if you go out and look at videos on how to do this thing, and they'll spend minutes and minutes about aligning this thing. And I don't worry too much about that. I kind of eyeball it to make sure that it's in line with the banjo, and then I tighten the tool post. What's a little more critical is I come in here and I have to get this set to the cutter. And it's going to take me a little bit. I'll try to talk my way through it. But what I do is I eyeball the parallelism of this chuck. I want it parallel to my lathe ways, the ways on the lathe bed. And so I turn the chuck to an area where I don't have a chuck key hole. And I'm trying to do two things here. I'm trying to get this cutter to where I can move up to it with my thread here and lead screw. And I'm also trying to make sure that that is parallel with the ways on the lathe. So I'm eyeballing it down there. That doesn't look too bad. This is why I have the light up here, is because you do need to be able to see this. I'm going to go ahead and lock that down. And what I'm looking for here is I'm looking for scratch contact. And I'm not there yet. Now, even though they pretty well have any slop out of this screw here, this is the screw that brings the workpiece toward the cutter. I'm sure there are people out there that would give this a name. I don't know what that is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work up about a quarter turn or so at a time. Always tighten this screw before I check. And again, I'm looking for a scratch. And I'm getting the scratch. It's very light. So as I turn this back up, I don't know how good our camera is, but right here, there's the scratch from when I was contacting that cutter. It's just a scratch. That tells me I'm like at 0, okay? So what I do now is I back this off. I loosen this knob, and don't ask me why it's this much. I turn this a half a turn, and I'm actually going to give it like a turn and an eighth. And now I'm ready to cut threads. And I cut threads 95% of the time on a single pass. Some people like to work up. I find personally that I have better success and better threads if I cut them in a single pass. So, all right. So what we're going to do is we're going to start this. Turn the cutter at 2500. As long as I'm cutting threads, I'm always going to turn with the knob. as I back out, I'm always gonna turn backwards with the chuck. Does anybody want to take a wild guess as why that is?
You don't want to unscrew the chuck.
I don't want to unscrew the chuck off the lead screw because then that would change my register to the cutter. Okay. You guys are gonna get your night work tonight, because I can tell you already, I'm gonna need to make another pass. So again, how well can you see this? You can see that I really did cut a good sharp thread, which is probably another discussion. So I'm gonna loosen this guy. I'm gonna take him in about another 1/8. And we're gonna cut our second pass. Dog only misbehaves when there's company around. So I probably succumbed to temptation and took it too far that time, but that's okay. So did you hear it stop cutting as I came into that groove that we cut, that undercut at the end of the threads? And I put a pencil mark up here so I know when to stop turning when I do the stabilization with CA. Now, pencil mark isn't needed very often, but if the CA really blooms, when you go and put the accelerator on it, it's worth having there. So again, we're going to stabilize the threads. The manufacturer says to flood the threads with CA, which I take it to mean you want to just fill the threads as full as they'll go before it drops out the bottom and maybe keep going. So again, we're going to we're doing that to try to distribute the CA. And then, so you do use a lot of accelerator. I do anyway. And I tried using pump accelerator, and for this, and when I do pins and use the CA finish, I only use the pump accelerator, the pump bottles, but for this, it just, the spray works much better. And then what I also learned is those pump accelerator bottles didn't like freezing weather, and I do not get that. But if those suckers, because it's acetone, I mean, is the base of the accelerator, so you'd think it'd be antifreeze, but when they went through a freeze-thaw cycle out in my back shop, apparently it made googies because they wouldn't pump anymore. Weird stuff, so spray accelerator it is. So we're just going to clean the accelerator out of the thread, or the CA out of the thread. At this point, we should only be getting CA, but if it's on a dark wood, you will see that it's stained the color of the wood. So having that mark at the top there to tell me where to stop. If I get a real big CA bloom, that can just be really convenient. This one, it didn't make so awful much difference. So we don't quite want to take that out of the chuck yet, because we want to do one or two things while it's still in the chuck before we switch to threading the top. I try to lay my paper towel over the top of my CA. That always reminds me to use the paper towel. I don't do that at home. So you see, I didn't really have to beat that to loosen it. It just took a good tap to loosen the collet in the headstock. It's not like I'm pounding on the bearings.
Tony, is there any feature on that threading jig that steered you in that direction compared to other ones?
No, in fact, I'm glad you asked the question, because I'm not here to tell you this is the best threading jig. I'm really not. Well, the feature, frankly, the feature that steered me toward this one was the price, you know, and what you got for the dollar. I can't remember who makes the other fairly popular one. And my impression is it's probably a little more precise. But this is good enough for me. It's better than one item made by myself, I can tell you that. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to go back in, we're going to clean any leftover CA out of that undercut that I have there. And it's important that we do that, because when we go to fit the cap, after a while, we don't want any leftover CA in there. Then we're also, since we have the parting tool in our hand, we're going to come in and just put the suggestion of a bevel there on the corner of that starting thread. So there's our bottom threaded. The only thing I would have done at home is I would have sanded the inside out before I did that. But we're not going to turn the bottom off of that tonight, so I can do that. Okay. So here again is a roughed out cap. It's been allowed to set. We're going to take a look and see how it spins. Spins pretty good. First thing we're going to do is we're going to face it with a spindle gouge. Now we're going to transfer measurement for the internal threads onto the face there. This is where things begin to get a little bit interesting. So the way I do these, and you'll find people that say this is backwards. Some people turn the caps, thread the caps, and then they thread the bottom to fit the caps. I do it backwards because of my work process. And my work process, see if I can do this without thinking about it ahead of time. My work process is to thread and finish the inside of the bottom, take it out of the chuck and put the cap in, I thread the inside of the cap. I sand it out, texture it, and then I screw it onto the bottom, put the bottom back in the chuck, and use the bottom to turn the cap to finish the cap. So that's my work process. I turn the bottom, I finish the bottom by putting it on a chuck. This chuck, which I have the jaws expanded on at the moment, but I just simply expand the jaws into the bottom. And again, that's a change in work process from what I described last year, but it really makes things go quite a bit faster. So we want to measure this so that we can make the right sized hole. And this measures out at 1.710, 1.710, 1.710. Okay, we're going to use 1.710. So is this hole going to be bigger or smaller than 1.710? Everybody say smaller? There, well, you guys are knowing.
I gotta get your chart.
It has to be smaller. Right. So how much smaller? Now, let's see how good you really are. 16 per inch, 16 threads per inch. How much smaller does my inside hole? How much smaller does my outside hole need to be than the inside hole? Well,
How deep did you cut the threads?
well, they're 16 per inch threads, so whatever they are. I mean, I don't know.
No, that's length.
Right. So don't ask me this. So the manufacturer for 16 per inch thread recommends 40 thousandths. I am heavy handed. So what I have learned is 45 works better for me. 40 would probably work perfect for you. So I said we were at 1710 or 1.710. How much is 1710 minus 45? It's going to be 1665.
That sounds good.
So, you know, the hardest part of this is getting your high quality Harbor Freight digital caliper to stay on 1665. This is not my favorite calendar, but I gotta tell you, whatever they do, these last. This one's a lot easier to use. It's a Nico that I bought off of the internet, and you can see that's one of the problems with it right there, is the battery door just slid off of it. This one has a tendency to go to 0 at any time that it so pleases. Yeah. So, but that one will lock in. This one I can turn on this screw as hard as I can, and it doesn't lock in that well. And I really don't want to use the $150 caliper in my wood shop. I'm sorry. So we're going to transfer this measurement. I'm going to do it. It's going to look like I'm touching both legs. I'm not. I'm only touching one leg and watching with the other one to see where I'm at. If I try to touch with both legs, it's going to jerk this thing out of my hand. And throw it across the room. Okay. So I make my initial cut with my spindle down. Sorry. that all right? Okay, now, oh, too early. Almost got ahead of myself. So I use the spindle gouge for the initial cut, and I'm going to use my box scraper to bring that out to my mark. So this box scraper I talked about a year ago, it's a Benjamin's Best with a negative rate grind on it. I did sharpen it fairly recently, and it just does a real nice job. The only thing I don't like about it is the angle. I do kind of wish that it wasn't angled the way it is, but that's kind of. Actually ended up just a tiny bit big, but that's good. That's fine. Okay. So we want to undercut in this just like we had on the bottom.
Check the monitor for.
Okay.
Need to flip it to the other side.
And so for this cut, that's good. So we want an undercut for our threads, just like we had on the other one. So we come in and make this cut. This looks a little weird, but it's good because we're writing the bevel. I have this gouge rotated way over until I'm writing the bevel. Yeah, undercut that threaded area just a little bit. In fact, I may have cut it. And again, we're going to condition our thread area with CA.
What type of wood is the cover?
This?
Yeah.
That's black walnut. Black walnut. Don't you love when you talk to somebody that's not a woodworker, oh, black walnut, that's hard. And you can run across a piece of it every once in a while, it is. But it's a little bit open grained and absorbent, has been my experience with most of it. I suspect if you got some good old growth stuff, it would probably be a little harder to move.
They're probably comparing it to pines.
Maybe so. Can you get a good look in here? Yeah, oh, okay, you have to manually zoom. Ah, there you go. Okay. So anyway, this is what we're gonna thread, and I guess what I was kind of hoping to be able to show on the camera, it's really not coming up. Let me do it this way. So whenever I use the chuck key to pop these off, hopefully they're not that tight, this one. So I always try to make sure I'm turning, yeah, okay, it did come. I'm pulling on the chuck key in such a way that it's tightening the chuck, not loosening it. Does that make sense? So that I don't inadvertently loosen the chuck. Okay. So here's my undercut, which got a little bit big on this one, and this is the area that we're going to thread right here. That's kind of what I was wanting to show. All right. Now this looks like we're doing the same thing over again, but the inside gets a little trickier. Plus, we're trying to fit the two threads together. So to make a complete demonstration, we almost have to do both in and out. Come on. Make sure we don't have anything on the top. Who is this guy? Stuff laying on the way. So when I put the chuck on the lathe, I want to have about 4 to 5 threads between the back of the chuck adapter and the jig when I tighten it up. And the reason for that on this top will become obvious as we do it. So this is very similar to what we did on the bottom. We're working this forward. We're trying to get it parallel with the ways at the same time that we're getting close enough to get that zero reference, get that light scratch when we turn it past the cutter. So now, if you see me turning the cutter, it's a little bit, it's to make sure that there's a cutter close to the workpiece. In other words, you can have the cutter position where it's where you're between two cutters trying to find that scratch point there.
Does that cutter have a sharp point or does it have a flat?
Because I think a sharp point, I'll pass it around while you look at it. Not sure exactly what you're asking.
Well, does it come completely to a point or does it come like that?
Completely to a point. Yeah. Okay. So the measurement is still the same. You want to do a half and maybe just a touch more. And you can hear it stop cutting when you go into that other chamber.
So you did your touch off and so much of a turn?
Yeah. So the touch off and then a little over half of a turn. And again, it looks like, so when I start making up, then I go about 1/8 of a turn at a time. This one.
You have the left hand on the top while you're bringing it in.
Right,
That just,
that's just to stabilize it, and the manufacturer says it's a good way to make sure you don't get your hand in the cutter. So, works for me. Okay. So, if I was at home, I would go ahead and stabilize these threads with CA now. I'm not gonna do that. But what we can do at this point is we can swing this around and we can check our fit. Okay. So at home, I always go ahead and stabilize the threads because I've done enough of these. I'm usually pretty comfortable with that. So at this point, if our fit wasn't right, or actually, I should go ahead and stabilize the threads. We come back in, and then we can re-index. Because I haven't moved this at all, I can come in, swing that in, and I'm back in index. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and stabilize those quick now, because that's one thing if I don't do here, I might have trouble getting it. Okay, I've got a lot of CA in there, so we're going to get a nice bloom. Yeah, we're probably going to get googies on our cutter. So to me, this is not the best fit, but it's not a bad fit. This is one that it'll sell, if you will. So by the time this gets a little wipe on poly in those threads, it's going to feel pretty decent.
How is it you're not accidentally cross-threading when you're going through multiple times? How is it always lining up exactly the thread when you're going in the second or third time?
Because the relationship between the cutter is stabilized through the headstock, through the lays, through the banjo, up through the jig. So the relationship stays the same. So that's why I can loosen this, turn it around, look at it, bring it back into indexing, and bring it back into those threads. At this point, actually, because I always index my work pieces, I probably could put it back into Chuck and re-index it and recut those same threads again. So, any other questions about the threading? So, So one of the things about these acorns, and you're welcome to look at them during break or whenever. So just let me run through quickly here what we have. This is black walnut top. This is hammer cork bark wood bottom. Okay. Hammer cork bark tree wood bottom. This is canary wood bottom and a gray top with a stem made out of black walnut, which matches the Anna gray almost perfectly. Somebody ordered this as a custom order on Etsy. They wanted it by the end of this month when I got it made. And told them it was done, they never responded, so I just set it on Etsy. It'll sell, no problem. This is oak bottom and mulberry top. You look at this one thing you may want to look at is the oak really moved on me, and as a result, it got really thin, but that's how thin you can thread. That oak is cracked, by the way. You might play with it and look at it and find the crack. I hear it hit the floor, the crack won't be hard to find anymore. This one is a real recent one. Actually, these two are real recent. They actually both get more coats of wipe on poly before I put them on Etsy. This is ash. It's not this tree grew in front of the house that was the public library. And it came down a few years ago. My stepdaughter owned that house for a number of years. She's since sold it and moved. And this grain is pretty straight and plain, but there are parts of that tree that made what they call olive ash grains. Really pretty. And mulberry top. And it needs another coat or two of poly. This is mountain ash. It's a little jar. I told Ron earlier, there are people on Etsy that buy just about anything made out of mountain ash, especially if you call it Rowan. Fine, I'll make it. They can buy it. They can do what they want to with it. So that's a little jar. I love making these little jars. To me, this is what satisfies my soul. So, other than the stuff that should satisfy your soul. Anyway, this is a jar that I turned today, and I turned it as part of this demonstration. So we're not going to do it, but we're going to talk about it. So the nice thing about these acorns is that it really doesn't matter if my grain lines up, right? It's a cherry top and an ash bottom or this or that. But this is oak. This came out of a beam, out of a barn. This oak was probably cut down well over 100 years ago. It might have been 150 years ago. And I needed something with grain in it to talk about. I picked this up. I'm sure why not, works. So what I have here is I have a couple of pencil marks. I have a pencil mark here and a pencil mark there. And if I align those pencil marks, all my grain is lined up. I have a little bullseye here and a long one here, bullseye here and bullseye here. You get this stripe up here and you can kind of see it continue and so on and so forth. So how do I get it to do that? If I'm threading, I mean, right? You don't want to just have it be whatever it is. You want that grain to line up. So what do I do? Ron?
Start a bolt at the top.
I've never tried that, but it's an interesting theory. The trouble is, you'd want the thing to enter the wood at the same point. I don't know.
Adjust the shoulder.
Adjust the shoulder. And what do you mean by adjust the shoulder?
Like on the large part of the ball, just bring it down a little further.
Yeah, I wouldn't use the large part. And the reason is the large part, the curve starts there already. But yes, and So what I can do is I can come in here and I can take a little bit off right here, and that will let me turn it. Now, how much do I take off? So
Just the right amount.
just the right amount, exactly.
Yeah.
So, well, there, you can help yourself a little bit here. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be guesswork, although guesswork is used at times. All right, okay, John's on the path here. I've got 16 threads per inch.
How many, how far off? What part of the revolution is it off?
And how much of the revolution is it off?
If it's off half, you take off.
Yeah, if it's off half of a revolution, you take off the 30 seconds. And then I have a parting tool here. How much is the 16th of an inch?
Half.
Point 0625. This was sold to me as a 16th inch parting tool, and it measures out at 0.0735. Okay, but okay, it's sort of a 16th of an inch. So if I have to take an 1/8 of a revolution off here, which that's probably a little less than an 1/8, I want to take off an 1/8 of a parting tool. Okay. The guys over across the pond and up north of the border, they like to say, you guys need to go metric. Metric's the only way to go. But they were never old stick in the thumb carpenters, right? Because why do we use the fractional system? It's a half of a half of a half of a half of a half. That's why it is, right? Seriously, I'm serious. If you know what an inch is, a half inch is half of that. A 1/4 inch is a half of that. An 1/8 inch is a half of that, and so on and so forth. And you can't do that with the metric system. Okay, I can't take a 1/5 of a half of an inch. I can't do that. That'd be like 1 millimeter. Okay, just in case you get what I mean. I can't do that. I can't go by fifths, but I can go by half pretty darn easy. So anyway, I'm done with that. So on this one, actually, I might even, before I took the parting tool with it, I might just try sanding it a little bit, but yeah, that's how you do it. You just take a little bit off of whichever side will stand it. Now that sounds really tight at the bottom, at the top. When I turn this, I turned a lot of threads on the bottom. I can probably end up taking 2 or 3 of these threads off. They're not needed, okay? And then that will take some of that tightness out of it that you hear. In fact, I'll do that before I do that adjustment, because it's very possible that this is bottoming out in the top when I thread it down. I don't think it is. And then I do want to say, I guess in my own defense as an artist, is I do want to work on this a little bit. Yeah, there's enough wood in here that I'm going to continue to work on this shape and try to refine it a little bit. Okay.
Do you ever use stationary belt sander that's
No.
just a little pad off?
Here's what my problem is in stationary belt sanders.
Tipping.
Is I start out with parallel, I never end up with parallel. It's always like that, or some combination. Sometimes it's domed. So, the lathe is a really kind of fun tool. It makes things square and it makes things round. Okay, that's threading. Any questions about threading? I think, we didn't do the complete thing. I got one around here that I worked on earlier. I mean, if we wanted to, we could chuck this up. Then to finish the acorn then. Now that sounds like a really tight fit, but a little bit of Johnson's wax in that's going to loosen right up and feel good. So what we would do is we would turn this off. We'd shape our cap. And then our cap would be done, shape and texture our cap would be done. One of the things I learned since last year on texturing these caps, if I come into this cap while it's spinning on the lathe with my texturing tool, with my texturing tool. Held just a tiny bit below center, it just puts a really nice spiral on that cap. And it's just, you can come in right on center and you get a nice texture. If you come in just like a 1/16 of an inch below center, you'll get the nicest little spiral out of the center of that cap out towards the outside. This one has a little bit of it. So we would turn the top, texture it. And then, like I said, for the bottoms anymore, I just mount them on this guy. I do put masking tape on the jaws of the chuck. And I expand that out and I just finish the bottom that way. It's so much faster than trying to build a jam chuck and mess around with it. None of the customers ever look inside and see those little divots anyway. Last threading piece that I wanted to talk about. Yes, you can thread face grain. This little box is face grain and it's threaded. Now, the interesting thing right now, it's threading together very nicely. Last winter, it had tight spots every half turn. Go figure. I built that to be a pick box. I don't know if any of you play guitar, you can tell me whether it would be handy to hold your picks in. So maybe this would be a good time to take a break. I'm going to switch the tool over into the sphere turning mode. It is 7:45. The sphere turning mode will not take as long when I talk about that because we're not going to turn the sphere. We're just going to talk about it. But at the same time, it might be kind of interesting to watch what we do to turn it into a sphere turning jig.
Very good. We have raffle tickets for sale. Please give me your money.
Thanks. Yep.
Dollar ticket, $5, just like that.
All right. Okay. So
Just all sit down, please.
I've almost completed converting this from a threading jig into a sphere jig. Now, when you heard that we were going to demonstrate sphere making, most of you probably thought we were going to swing something horizontally on the axis of the lathe. Not this one, it goes over the top. Okay, so that's one thing new. I said I was almost done setting it up. What I haven't done yet is I haven't set the collar here. So if I can find the correct Allen wrench to loosen my collar, let's go a little bigger than that. What I'm going to do is something similar to what we did when we set the other one up a little. So we'll raise that a little bit because I think that's the direction it's going to have to go. We're going to move that up as far as we can. We're going to swing that and we're going to eyeball the center of that bolt to the center of my dead center, the center of my dead center. Good. I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself.
Could you also center it on the X head on the other side?
You probably could. And not to get too far ahead of myself, I don't think this will be the final adjustment that we make. So, and what I found is they talk about how important it is to run the center of the threading jig to the center of the spindle, but this one is 10 times more critical than that threading jig. So that's gonna get us a starting point, what we just did there. Again, well, nah, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me make a couple of disclaimers. I am not a spear expert. You know, a number of you have heard me say, I had this demo coming up and I thought, well, people are gonna wanna say it, you can't just say, well, this both threads and make spears, and people go, yeah, sure, of course. I mean, people are gonna wanna see the spear thing, right? So I better learn how to do it. So this is the first spear I ever made in my life. And this is the second. This is ash, it's fairly green. This is Elmer corkbark tree. It's hollow, it does not thread apart. There are instructions with the kit on how to make spears that thread apart. And this is oak, because I wasn't happy with something on these, and I'll talk about that. Okay. So where do I go next? Will this come out? So let's talk about how to make this. And I'm kind of hesitating here a little bit simply because I'm not a spear making expert. But okay, let's finish up by talking about setting this tool up, and then we'll talk maybe a little bit more about spears. So here is a blank spear that I started this morning. Now, that one doesn't look too bad because, as I told you, I'm making more of them, and like most human beings, the more I do, the less awful I get. But this one has not been on the jig yet, and we'll talk about how to get to this point in a little bit. But I won't, but so setting this thing up, there's just a bunch of measurements that are really critical. You notice I have a pencil line on my roughed out sphere. This has to be in the pivot point here has to be in line with that pencil line. Okay. This cutter has to be in line with the center of your axis. There's two has to be's, all right? And this thing up and down has to be in line with the center of the axis. So not only do I have to be in line with the cutter edge, I also have to be up in line with my pivot point. Now, I'm going to drop this down a little bit because I want to see something. When I get down in here, I'm as high as I can go. Okay. When I get down in here, if I were to go ahead and start to make this sphere, and when I am at the very point of the sphere here, I want to be exactly at 90 degrees. I want to be exactly at 90 degrees with this. So on those first two spheres I made, something wasn't coming out right. And when I would finish them off, I would find that I was turning these ends that this jig leaves, I was turning them off, but before I got them totally turned off, I was cutting parent wood out of the middle of the sphere, which tells me that the sphere was shaped, and this will be an exaggeration, but if that's the center line of the sphere, it was shaped a little bit like that, okay? So that when I had those things left out here where I had my tenon and then had my center, it would turn these off, but before it turned these off, then I was turning off this wood here. Okay, does that make sense? So the next one, this little one, when I got it mounted up and started using it, I looked, oh, well, look, before, when I got down to where I should have been in the middle, I was still up about like so. You know, I definitely had more than 90 degrees there. And so then I lowered my collar and I raised the tool so that when I was in the middle, then it was at 90 degrees. So there's just a lot of things. So I didn't bring a square tonight. I would if I were going to be setting this up, I would square my banjo to the lathe, okay? And when I was happy with where I was at in the center point, I would actually take a nice straight piece of wood and clamp it to my ways so that I always knew where that center was if I had to move my jig a little bit. Because once I determine center this way, then I want to determine center this way. So it takes a little bit. Any questions about that? Any questions about the jig? The jig.
Yeah, what do they cost? What is it?
I spent, for the combination, I spent between $500 and $600
For both of them.
for both of them. Well, it's the same tool. I don't know. Let's talk about if, okay. So what you may or may not recognize here is this, there's a hole in here that this set screw goes into, and that is where this post mounted for doing threads. This hole right here is where the lead screw goes for doing threads. This hole already here, you put the bolt in, and again, it goes over the top to make the sphere. So underneath here is the hole for the post for doing threads, but then this piece right here is held in place with these 4 screws. There are 3 positions. Okay, this makes, I think, from like 1 inch up to 10-inch spheres. And it does it by moving this holder, this cutter holder. There's the small position, the medium position, the upper medium position. Then you take the 4 screws out, you turn it over, and you have a 4th position for really big spheres. And sorry about that. And then this cutter, the standard cutter is a tool steel cutter. This is an optional cutter. It's a carbide cutter. And there's a little line on here. If you notice, this carbide cutter isn't screwed straight on the end of that mount. It's kind of wobber jawed on there. That's deliberate. That's not by accident. So if I turn that, it wobbles. It should wobble as it goes around. So they put a little line right here to tell you where down is. Okay.
When you're rotating it, Tony, do you want to come and stop at 90 degrees or do you go past that?
You really will, it depends a little bit. On the headstock side, you'll never get to 90 degrees because you have to leave something to drive the workpiece. Okay.
But on the tailstock
On the
side,
tailstock side, if it's a really big sphere, you're probably going to keep your center on. But if it's not a terribly big sphere, I've done it both ways. So that's kind of leads into where I want to talk about next. So that's the jig. And again, we come in here, center it over the axis, center it. Oh, and yeah, it's important that you be square too, otherwise it's probably being square is one of the least important things. Okay, I said we wouldn't actually do one, but let's see what we can do. And intuitively, it turns backwards for me. So either I don't have it centered right or I didn't do a good job of it. So that's, if you notice, you try to get close. I think it's important to talk about how to try to get close before you put the jig on. And I will pass that around and you can take a look at it. You'll notice some penciled numbers on the base of this. So you can see, I'm passing it around so you can see if it's really round and whether the surface is to your exactly standard. So here are a couple that I've begun to lay out, and if you're trying to freehand, this may be helpful. So there's a method for freehanding spheres that they recommend that you use to try to get close before you make your sphere. So this is a block of wood, and I've measured it. So my center line here is obviously 1/2 of the diameter from the edge of my blank. And then there's a mathematical discipline called trigonometry. I don't know anything about it, but a trigonometrist has figured out that for us poor wood turners, 0.2 and 0.4 is close enough. So this line, this is my center line. This line is 0.2 of my diameter from my center line. And this diameter right here is 0.4 of my diameter. So do you see this tiny little tenon I have turned here? That's 0.4 of this, which is also the same as this. Okay. I said that wrong. It's the same as this. So I also have another tiny little tenon down in here that is also 0.4. So if I take and I turn a 45-degree angle, a roughly 45-degree angle, so here's my center line, here's one of my 0.2 lines, here's one of my 0.2 lines, here's my 0.4 tenon, and I've turned this straight line from there to there. Now I have what they call an octagon. Okay, and if the trigonometrist tells me that each of these sides of my octagon are roughly equal, and that the outside of my circle is going to be here at my center line, here halfway down that line, and here halfway down that line. So then I've already used my last, I put this in my chalk. Yeah, you guys had my chuck key because you don't want me to turn anymore. And guess which one of these I forgot to index when I turned it this morning. So if I put this in my chuck, yeah, then I round this off. I would actually probably part this off because, well, I don't know, I might want to use my tailstock, but I would take this down a little bit more, but leave myself a little bit of that 0.4 tenon. And so I just take my edges off. Now I have a rough turn sphere. Okay, and then as far as the jig is concerned, you want to make sure to take this material out. I've learned that the hard way. Because if you don't take this material out, you'll only be able to bring the jig over to about here. And you end up with a really big area here to turn off later. So once I get my rough turned sphere, like I'm passing around, I part it off here or use a saw. I part it off here or use a saw. Then I use something like this to drive the sphere. And this is actually this guy right here, okay? I mean, that is the same wood. And then I brought my own tailstock.
You might have to use the knockdown.
Yeah. So I made this adapter for my tailstock. And then I mount this with, I mount it at 90 degrees to where I use the jig, right? And I turn off the nubbies that are left. So, and that's where I was having trouble with those first two spheres is I get the nubbies, before I got the nubbies turned off, I was into the parent material. I figured out that it wasn't laying over far enough. Questions? Clear as mud? I don't know why I want to make spheres. I don't really. Yeah, right. Actually, craft shows, like if you got a bowl full of different kinds of wooden spheres, you just never know what people might buy. Any questions? Questions about the jig? So if you want to try to freehand turn a sphere, I'd really recommend that octagon thing. It took me forever to puzzle through it the first time, but now I can almost walk up and just, because I know the 0.2 and the 0.4. And, if you look on this one, you'll see that I just do the calculations right on the workpiece. So. And you probably don't have to be down to the thousandths of an inch like that here. Okay? Thanks, everybody. See you next month. If you're new to the club, I also am the webmaster and kind of the email person. I'm the guy that sends all the MailChimp stuff. If you'd like to help out with the club, we're always looking for help with that kind of stuff. And we'd feel free to step up and volunteer. So.
Very good. Thank you, Tony, again.
Is next month's meeting the 2nd or the 9th?
It is the 2nd.
Because I went to look at upcoming events, it said something about a demonstration on the 9th. That's not the meeting now?
No, that must be incorrect. It should be the first Monday.
Are you thinking August or?
August.
It'll be the first month, the first
the
Monday,
second.
right?
Okay.
Yes. However, September will be the 2nd Monday
Because of Labor Day.
because of Labor Day.
I'll be doing the raffle. Who wants a kit?